yet another thing on the mind of the market today might just be a report of a new novel coronavirus discovered in China. Former FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb joins us now. It's good to see you, and I'm glad you came on with us because I'm trying to cut through this report and find out what's legit and what might not be. What's your take on what you've read?
Yeah, I'm not too concerned based on this single report. They sample viruses from bats constantly over there, and they find novel viruses from time to time. And sometimes these novel viruses that they stumble upon harbor very concerning features. So this is not an uncommon finding. We find these things pretty routinely. I don't think we've ever identified a pre-spillover virus that went on to cause an epidemic. So I think the link to an imminent risk here is pretty flimsy, quite frankly. Probably the most concerning part of this story is that they did this experimentation in a low-security BSL-2 lab. And this was the Wuhan Institute of Virology. This is the same institute in Wuhan that has been implicated in a potential lab leak related to SARS-CoV-2. So to see them still experimenting with novel viruses in a BSL-2 lab, that's not too reassuring. But from this particular strain that they found, I don't have any concerns that this is going to cause an imminent risk, unless they have a laboratory accident. And one would hope that since they published these findings, they're now taking precautions to treat this strain with greater caution.
You know, it is interesting, if nothing else, some of the movement in stocks related to this report. I mean, the market itself seemed to take a bit of a leg down as this started circulating. Some of the vaccine stocks like Pfizer and Moderna shot higher, though they are off their highest levels too. Some of the airline stocks and cruise lines were lower as well. But if nothing else, it does just remind us that these sorts of stories are still out there. The concerns exist, and how ready we are to deal with the next pandemic, whenever it is and whatever form it shows up in, I think remains a question for the market.
Well, setting aside the policy framework right now in the United States, I think from a scientific standpoint, we'd be pretty able to prepare countermeasures against this, vaccines and monoclonal antibody drugs. This virus that they sampled, they did experimentation in human cells, human organoids, and found that it bound to the same receptor that SARS-CoV-2 binds to. So presumably you'd be able to develop a vaccine against it. So I think from a scientific standpoint, we would be able to pivot to countermeasures if, in fact, this spilled over, which I don't expect this to spill over, barring them having an accident with it, making a mistake with it, which I would hope that they're taking precautions to make sure that they handle this under tighter provisions right now. This experimentation was done a while ago, by the way, and the report was published 2 days ago. So this is not necessarily a new finding. I think it spilled into the market today because it was picked up by some prominent publications, but it actually has been circulating in scientific circles for a couple of days now.
Speaking of circulating, I mean, avian flu certainly has. We talked about it already in the context of inflation and egg prices. How concerned are you about the current outbreak, if you want to call it that?
Yeah, well, I'm very concerned about it from the standpoint of its risk to domestic agriculture. I think that this has now become endemic in U.S. cattle and in flocks, and it's going to be very hard to extinguish. And this may be a persistent threat that farmers need to continue to contend with. I don't think there's going to be any easy answer to the egg shortage right now. The administration is going to announce some measures next week. They've hinted at what they are, basically not culling herds as aggressively, not culling flocks as aggressively as they've done in the past, and also considering maybe vaccinating fowl, poultry. Those two have downsides, too. If you don't cull the flocks, this spreads very quickly within a flock once it gets in, and it's 100% fatal. So whether you cull the flock or you allow this to spread at some level, you may lose the flocks altogether anyway. And from the standpoint of vaccinating baby chicks, we export a lot of baby chicks in this country to countries like Europe and China, Mexico, Canada, the Philippines, Indonesia. And if we vaccinate them, probably other countries aren't going to accept the export of our baby chicks. And that's one reason why the industry, the poultry industry, has been against mass vaccination, because the vaccine itself isn't sterilizing. So you could still have a situation where a chick becomes infected with the virus and can spread it, but it's asymptomatic, so you may not detect it. So Europeans don't want our chicks, if they've been vaccinated, because they worry that they could be harboring the virus. So there aren't any easy answers here. From the standpoint of a human risk, I think that hasn't changed. That's out there. There is a risk that this could mutate in a way that could infect humans. And the more virus you have circulating, the more that risk goes up. But I think it's a low probability risk at this point. But I think the more imminent risk is to domestic agriculture.